Okay, let's unpack this because, when you get your complete blood count back from the doctor, that routine CBC spreadsheet that's just like filled with numbers and unpronounceable words and those little high and low flags.
Right, the ones that always make you panic for a second.
Exactly. It looks like pure, sterile, modern science. You assume you're looking at this highly objective, I don't know, engineering report of your own biology. But if you actually peel back the medical Latin and Greek on that page, you aren't really looking at modern science at all.
No, not at all. You're looking at a living fossil record.
Yeah, a record of 19th century rivalries, deep evolutionary quirks, and in one case, literal optical illusions. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive, everyone. Today, our mission is to take your sources on hematology and clinical vocabulary and decode the hidden biology buried inside the words on every routine blood test.
Because the vocabulary we use to diagnose patients today, it's heavily anchored to the past. In medicine, a single root word can act as this two-way diagnostic signal, revealing an entire landscape of what is happening inside the human body. We are basically forcing highly advanced diagnostic realities into ancient linguistic containers.
Specifically, the Greek roots, erythro for red and leuko for white. And, on the surface, this Greek naming system seems like a super simple color-coding scheme,
It
right?
seems that way, yeah.
Erythro gives us erythrocytes, our red blood cells. Leuko gives us leukocytes, our white blood cells. But that color coding is actually incredibly deceptive. So let's look at the red cells first. We know the red color comes from hemoglobin,
Right.
but it isn't just a stagnant red dye. The redness is actually a real-time chemical indicator of the hemoglobin's cargo.
Yeah, because hemoglobin has a very specific molecular structure. It's this porphyrin ring with an iron atom at its absolute center, which is known as the heme group. And when an oxygen molecule binds to that iron atom, it physically alters the electron configuration of the entire molecule.
Oh, wow. So it changes shape.
Exactly. That structural shift changes how the molecule absorbs light. So, in its oxygenated state, it absorbs blue and green wavelengths and intensely reflects red. But when it drops off the oxygen, the electron configuration shifts back, and it reflects a much darker, sort of crimson-purple red.
So the root erythro is literal, but it's describing a dynamic physical state, not just like a painted color.
Right, it's an active process.
Which actually brings up a massive misconception that people have about the iron in their blood, because the immediate thought is, if I have iron in a liquid environment and I introduce oxygen, the red color must just be rust.
The old bicycle left out in the rain analogy.
Yes. People assume their blood is red for that exact same reason. But if the iron in our blood were actually oxidizing, we would be in critical medical danger, wouldn't we?
We would be in extreme danger. The mechanism of oxygen transport relies entirely on reversible binding. The iron in the heme group exists in a ferrous state, which means it has a +2 charge.
Okay, +2.
Right. And in this specific state, it can grab an oxygen molecule, hold on to it as it travels through the circulatory system, and then, and this is the crucial part, let it go when it reaches the tissue that needs it.
But if it rusted...
If the iron were to actually oxidize, like rust on a bicycle, it would lose an electron and convert to a ferric state, which is a +3 charge.
And at that point, the delivery system is just broken.
Completely broken. Oxidized iron binds so tightly to oxygen that it refuses to release it to the tissues.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, there is a pathological condition called methemoglobinemia where this exact chemical error occurs. The blood turns this dark chocolate brown, and the patient effectively suffocates on a cellular level, even though their lungs are pulling in plenty of oxygen.
That is terrifying. So the redness of healthy blood is a testament to the fact that the iron is explicitly not rusting.
Exactly. It's proof that the system is working.
Okay, so erythro is an accurate dynamic description of the red cell, but the exact opposite is true for the other half of the CBC. We use the root leuko to describe white blood cells, but if you isolate a single leukocyte under a microscope in its natural state, it has no pigment whatsoever.
None. It is entirely translucent.
Wait, if they're completely clear, why on earth did early scientists call them white? Is it like a single snowflake being clear, but a whole snowbank looking white?
What's fascinating here is the perfect analogy. The word white is a complete misnomer if you were looking at the cellular level.
Yeah.
Early microscopists, They weren't looking at perfectly isolated dyed single cells.
Right, they were just looking at raw fluids.
Exactly. They were observing bulk biological fluids. The biological equivalent of your snowbank is something called the Buffy coat.
The Buffy coat.
Yeah. If you take a vial of whole blood and spin it in a centrifuge, you are applying intense gravitational force to separate the components by density.
So the heavy stuff sinks.
Right. The erythrocytes are heavy. They're packed with iron, so they sink to the very bottom, creating a dark red column. The plasma, which is mostly water, stays in the top as a yellowish fluid.
Okay, so where do the clear cells go?
They're sandwiched right between them. It's this microscopic density gradient, a very thin, gel-like layer that makes up about 1% of the total volume.
And that layer is packed with billions of those translucent immune cells just sitting on top of the platelets.
Millions and billions of them, yes.
So because the light is hitting this dense aggregation of colorless, chaotic cell surfaces, it reads as a pale beige-white smear in the test tube.
That beige smear is the Buffy coat. The word leukocyte gets its entire visual justification from that bulk macro view.
Wow.
The root leuko describes the behavior of light hitting a massive pile of cells in a centrifuge tube, not the biological reality of the cell itself.
It's just incredible that an optical illusion is permanently baked into the dictionary of modern medicine. It really is. But I want to pivot back to the erythrocytes for a second, because the mechanical lengths these cells go to in order to carry that oxygen cargo is staggering.
Oh, it's extreme.
The process is called erythropoiesis, right? The kidneys constantly monitor the oxygen tension in your blood, and if it drops, they secrete a hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO.
Which signals the bone marrow to start manufacturing more red blood cells.
And this manufacturing process requires cellular specialization taken to, like, an extreme evolutionary endpoint.
Truly extreme. The erythrocyte's only mandate is to maximize its internal volume for hemoglobin. To achieve that, as the mammalian red blood cell matures in the bone marrow, it orchestrates its own dismantling.
Dismantling.
Yeah, it forms an internal ring of actin filaments, which are the same proteins muscles use to contract, and it literally squeezes its own nucleus to the edge of the cell and pinches it off into a tiny vesicle called a peronocyte.
Which is just immediately eaten by surrounding macrophages.
Exactly. It throws out its own brain, basically.
So it voluntarily lobotomizes itself. It ejects its own DNA, and it doesn't stop there, does it?
No, it ejects its ribosomes, too, so it can no longer synthesize proteins.
And crucially, it shreds its own mitochondria, which, I mean, that creates one of the greatest biological ironies in the human body.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the erythrocyte is the ultimate delivery truck for oxygen, but because it has no mitochondria, it is biologically incapable of using aerobic respiration.
It cannot consume a single molecule of the oxygen it is carrying.
So you're telling me the cell whose entire job is carrying oxygen to the body has no mitochondria, meaning it can't actually use the oxygen itself. That's like a pizza delivery driver who is biologically incapable of eating the pizza.
That's exactly what it is. They are entirely reliant on anaerobic glycolysis generating energy by breaking down glucose without oxygen for their entire 120-day lifespan in the bloodstream.
Wow.
If it retained its mitochondria, it would metabolize its own cargo before it ever reached the peripheral tissues.
They're surrounded by the product, but strictly forbidden from utilizing it. And what's wild is that mammals are the absolute outliers here. Like, if you draw blood from a bird, a reptile, or a fish, their erythrocytes still have full functional nuclei.
Yeah, mammals traded cellular longevity and repair capabilities for sheer cargo capacity and physical flexibility. Stripping out the internal organelles allows the mammalian red blood cell to collapse into a biconcave disc.
Which looks like a little donut, right?
Sort of a donut without the hole punched all the way through, yeah.
Yeah.
And that lets it fold and fold again to squeeze through capillaries that are actually narrower than the cell's own diameter.
That biological drive to maximize cargo capacity is exactly what was exploited in one of the biggest scandals in modern sports history.
Oh, the doping scandals.
Yeah, we mentioned the hormone EPO, which the kidneys use to trigger this manufacturing process. Endurance athletes, like those in the infamous U.S. Postal Service cycling doping rings, weaponize recombinant EPO.
They injected synthetic versions of the hormone to artificially command their bone marrow to churn out millions of extra red blood cells.
Right, artificially raising their oxygen-carrying capacity.
But the challenge for anti-doping authorities was that recombinant EPO is nearly structurally identical to the endogenous EPO your own kidneys make.
So you can't just easily screen the urine for a foreign chemical.
Exactly. Authorities had to develop an entirely new methodology, which is the biological passport. Rather than looking for the drug, the passport tracks the mechanical footprint the drug leaves behind in the body over time.
By looking specifically at reticulocytes, right, the immature red blood cells.
That is the linchpin of the biological passport.
Yeah.
When a bone marrow factory is artificially stimulated by injected EPO, it works in overdrive. It starts rushing the product out the door before it's fully finished.
So it's shipping half-built cars, basically.
Basically, yeah. These immature red blood cells, reticulocytes, flood the bloodstream. The biological passport tracks the ratio of these immature reticulocytes to mature erythrocytes. If an athlete suddenly shows a massive, unexplained spike in reticulocytes, it is mechanical proof that the bone marrow was chemically forced into overdrive, even if the synthetic EPO is already out of their system.
It's fascinating how understanding the deep biology of a single cell type just shifts the entire landscape of forensic testing.
Yeah.
We have this highly specialized, uniform entity in the red blood cell doing one very specific job, but the white blood cell is, like, the exact opposite.
Oh, completely.
The history of the term leukocyte is really a story of how a single generic word survived even after we realized it described a completely fractured taxonomy of cells that have almost nothing in common.
Right. To understand why we are stuck with the umbrella term leukocyte, we have to go back to 1845 and a massive priority dispute in pathology.
This is the Virchow and Bennett feud,
Yeah.
right?
Between two pioneering physicians, the Scottish doctor John Hughes Bennett and the German pathologist Rudolf Virchow. Both men were independently examining the blood of patients who had died from a mysterious fatal illness. And instead of the normal deep red fluid, the blood was thick, pale, and swarming with massive quantities of white corpuscles.
And Bennett looked at this pale, swarming fluid and concluded that it was suppuration, essentially, pus forming spontaneously within the bloodstream.
Which is a wild conclusion to modern ears.
Right. I mean, how could Bennett, a brilliant scientist, look at this and incorrectly think it was just pus inside the bloodstream? How do you make that mistake?
Well, you have to remember that pathology was still shifting away from humors to cellular biology. Bennett was operating under the dying remnants of humoral theory. He was applying the old medical rules to a new observation.
So he was just using the framework he had.
Exactly. If you see white, milky fluid aggregating in the body in the 1840s, the logical trained conclusion is infection and pus.
But Virchow saw it differently.
Virchow's monumental contribution to medicine was that he completely rejected that humoral paradigm. He looked at the exact same pale blood and realized the white corpuscles were not a secondary infection or a byproduct of pus.
So what did he think it was?
He deduced that the blood-forming tissue itself had become diseased. The body was manufacturing its own pathological cells. Virchow called the condition Weiss's Blut, which translates to white blood, and that was eventually Latinized to leukemia.
Wow, white blood.
Yeah, it was a conceptual leap into modern cellular pathology.
So Virchow wins the intellectual turf war, and the term leukemia is born. But at that point, a leukocyte was still just a generic label for any of those clear cells in the buffy coat.
Right, they all just looked like identical clear blobs to them.
The realization that these cells were completely different machines didn't happen until 1879 when Paul Ehrlich revolutionized hematology by borrowing chemistry from, of all places, the textile industry.
Yo, the dyes.
He started using synthetic aniline dyes to stain blood smears, right?
Ehrlich discovered that if you expose these clear leukocytes to different chemical dyes, they selectively absorb different colors based on their unique internal chemistry.
So they weren't all the same inside.
Not at all. It was a structural revelation. The dyes are essentially salts with either acidic or basic properties. Ehrlich found that some leukocytes contained internal granules that had a high affinity for acidic dyes, like eosin.
And what happened to those?
Those cells stained a brilliant pink, so he named them eosinophils, literally, eosin-loving.
Okay, so that's one type. And other cells had an affinity for the basic dyes, like methylene blue.
Right. The basic dyes bound to the acidic components inside certain cells, turning them deep purple or dark blue. He called those basophils.
Makes sense.
And a third set of cells didn't strongly prefer acid or base. They stained a neutral lilac color with a combination dye. Those became neutrophils.
So you add in lymphocytes and monocytes, and suddenly Ehrlich proves that the leukocyte isn't just one thing. It's a fractured taxonomy of 5 distinct structural and functional categories. I mean, an isoteutrophil fights parasites. A neutrophil eats bacteria. A lymphocyte produces antibodies. They behave nothing alike, they look different, they have different chemical properties. But because we were already locked into Virchow's old vocabulary, we just kept the umbrella term leukocyte.
The term shifted from being a literal description of a colorless cell in a buffy coat to a broad functional category for circulating immune cells.
And because medical terminology got locked into those ancient Greek roots centuries ago, doctors today are basically forced to use a language that fundamentally contradicts modern biology.
We really do stretch these roots to their absolute limits.
We combine them with suffixes like agososis for an abnormal increase, as in leukocytosis, or abopenia for a dangerous deficiency, like leukopenia in a chemotherapy patient. But treating these prefixes and suffixes like modular Lego bricks creates some really bizarre semantic paradoxes.
The most glaring example of that is how the definition of leukemia drifted over the last century. Virchow coined it literally to mean white blood, because the sheer volume of leukocytes turned the blood pale. But over decades of clinical practice, leukemia stopped being a literal description of blood color.
It changed meaning.
It became a generic structural catch-all term for any clonal proliferation of hematopoietic stem cells, meaning any malignant cancer originating in the bone marrow.
Regardless of which actual cell lineage is mutating, which explains the ultimate oxymoron in modern diagnostics, erythroleukemia.
Yes.
Wait, I just have to point out the absurdity here. Erythro means red, and leukemia means white, a blood disease. So this is a white blood disease of the red cells. That's an ultimate oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp.
It is entirely an oxymoron. In acute erythroid leukemia, the cancer is aggressively mutating the immature red blood cell precursors in the marrow. There's no excess of white blood cells involved.
But because it starts in the marrow,
Because the disease originates as a marrow cancer, it gets slapped with the inherited leukemia label. You are diagnosing a red cell cancer using a word that explicitly means white.
it's a total trap for medical students because, they're taught that erythro means red blood cell and leuko means white blood cell. And they assume those roots are exclusively quarantined to hematology.
Which is a mistake, because the roots just mean the colors red and white, full stop.
So if a student assumes leuko always implies an immune cell, they will be hopelessly confused in, like, a dermatology clinic?
Oh, absolutely. A dermatologist will diagnose a patient with leukoplakia, which are thick white patches on the mucous membranes of the mouth, or leukoderma, which is a localized loss of skin pigmentation resulting in white patches.
An erythema.
Erythema is a term for skin redness caused by capillary dilation and increased blood flow to the superficial layers of the skin. It has absolutely zero relation to a patient's red blood cell count.
So context in medical terminology is basically the only thing preventing total diagnostic chaos.
Pretty much, yeah.
This friction between historical language and modern mechanics also shows up in how we physically test the blood, like the classic erythrocyte sedimentation rate, the ESR.
That is a perfect example of a legacy test.
The entire premise of the ESR is literally measuring the velocity of red blood cells sinking to the bottom of a vertical tube over an hour. Which, that seems like a bizarre, almost medieval metric for determining if a patient has inflammation.
It does sound medieval, but to understand the ESR, you have to look at the electromagnetic properties of the red blood cell.
Okay, electromagnetics.
Yeah, erythrocytes have a coating of sialic acid on their membrane, which gives them a negative surface charge. This creates a repulsive force called the zeta potential, which keeps the cells bouncing off each other and suspended in the plasma.
Like magnets repelling each other.
Exactly. But when the body experiences systemic inflammation, the liver floods the bloodstream with acute phase proteins, particularly fibrinogen.
And those massive inflammatory proteins disrupt the magnetic repulsion, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the mechanical process. The fibrinogen binds to the red blood cells, masking that negative zeta potential.
So they stop repelling.
Right? Without that repulsive charge, the red cells start sticking together, stacking up like rolls of coins in a formation called rouleau.
Oh, wow.
And because a stack of 20 cells is significantly heavier and denser than a single suspended cell, gravity takes over and they sink to the bottom of the tube much faster. A fast sedimentation rate proves that the blood is thick with inflammatory proteins.
But the big clinical debate today is whether the ESR is actually useful anymore because it is incredibly nonspecific. Like, your ESR will rise if you have a bacterial infection. It will rise if you have an autoimmune flare-up.
Or during pregnancy.
Right, or with certain cancers, or even just as a natural artifact of aging. It acts as a fire alarm that tells you something is burning in the building, but it gives you absolutely no indication of which room the fire is in.
That lack of specificity is exactly why modern diagnostics heavily favor testing directly for C-reactive protein, or CRP.
Because it's more direct.
Yes. Instead of measuring the secondary mechanical effect of red cells sinking, a CRP test directly quantifies the specific inflammatory protein secreted by the liver. It spikes faster, it drops faster when the inflammation resolves, and it just provides a much sharper, high-fidelity picture of the patient's immediate systemic state.
So the ESR is slowly being phased out.
It's being relegated to a supporting role for a handful of highly specific rheumatological conditions, mostly.
It's just a perfect encapsulation of how medicine evolves. We move from observing the macroscopic behavior of cells sinking in a tube to quantifying the precise molecular proteins causing the reaction.
It's a shift from the macro to the micro.
So what does this all mean? Let's pull all of this together. We started with two simple Greek roots on a routine CBC spreadsheet, erythro and leuko. And by tracing those roots, we uncovered the allosteric chemistry of a heme group.
The optical illusion of a buffy coat.
Right, and the evolutionary extremes of a cell ejecting its own nucleus, and the 19th century turf wars that locked us into a fractured medical vocabulary. The language of medicine isn't a sterile dictionary. It is an active, chaotic, living fossil record of human discovery.
And every time you look at a diagnostic chart, you are reading the historical ledger of how we learned to conceptualize our own biology. But, there is one final quirk buried in this vocabulary that perfectly illustrates how deeply irrational this history can be.
Oh, do tell.
Well, we established the suffix phenia designates a dangerous deficiency.
Where a lack of white blood cells is leukopenia, a lack of platelets is thrombocytopenia. It's a highly logical modular system.
Exactly. But when a patient has a dangerous lack of red blood cells, the medical community almost never uses the term erythropenia. We universally use the word anemia.
Anemia. Yeah.
If you break down the Greek origins of the word anemia, the prefix without means without. Anemia means blood. It does not mean low red blood cells. The literal translation is no blood at all.
Wait, really? Which is a hilariously dramatic exaggeration for a patient who is sitting right in front of you, very clearly full of blood.
It is an ancient theatrical exaggeration that medicine simply absorbed and standardized. It bypasses the entire logical naming system we just spent this time analyzing.
That is wild.
It leaves you wondering, when you listen to your doctor explain a diagnosis, how many other ancient historical quirks, optical illusions, and dramatic exaggerations are hiding inside the words they're using?
I will never look at a blood test the same way again. It is a great reminder that no matter how sterile and objective the spreadsheet looks, science is still a deeply, messily human endeavor. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions about the hidden mechanisms inside yourself, and we'll see you next time.